Right. I want to ask you about that social media piece that you mentioned there. So is it just the act of scrolling social media and being inundated with new ideas, or is it the light being emitted from the phone?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's been a lot of discussion in the media about looking at devices before you go to sleep, because the light from those devices will delay the clock. Of course, it's evening time, evening light delays the clock. The data supporting that is immensely weak. So a famous study really looked at Kindle use prior to sleep time. So the experiment involved 4 hours of continuous use of a Kindle on its brightest light intensity on 5 consecutive nights.
All right.
And at the end of 5 nights, it delayed sleep onset just statistically by 10 minutes. And as one of my colleagues said, well, it may be statistically significant, but that's biologically meaningless.
Fair, yeah.
I mean, 10
Right.
minutes is nothing with all the other variables going on within our life. So the role of light in delaying the clock at night from devices is probably minimal. I'm not saying it doesn't have any effect. It will have some effect. And it will depend upon its brightness. And of course, light is not only interacting with the circadian systems, but it's also interacting with our alerting systems. So the brighter the light, the more alert we are. Now, I think it's rather ironic that the last thing that many of us do before we go to bed, we stand in the most brightly illuminated room, the bathroom, looking into an illuminated mirror, if you can stand it, cleaning your teeth. And that's probably not smart. And again, I've always puzzled that there are not manufacturers producing a bathroom mirror with a night setting, which is sort of dimmer, and a morning setting, which is much brighter, which will increase the lightness and help regulate the clock. So the circadian system, we talked about those novel receptors. Humans are relatively massively insensitive to light in terms of the circadian system.
Interesting.
And in fact, it wasn't until 1987, and again, I was fortunate enough to be at that meeting, when the Honmas showed the first really good evidence that the human circadian system is regulated by light. And they had an experiment where individuals were exposed to, I think it was 6 hours of light for 5,000 lux. Now that's brightish light. I mean, if you think about the environment, so the brightest day would be something like 100,000 lux. Moonlight would be 1 lux or so.
Okay.
So this is the sort of levels of light you'd encounter outside, or relatively early in the morning, and they showed light had an effect. Before that, people were saying, well, it's probably social cues. It's when you eat, it's when you interact that set the clock. They do have a mild modulating effect, but it's light that's the most important. And this was missed because people had used levels of light which are effective in mice or rats, which are very low. They can regulate their clocks with low levels of light and relatively briefly. We need bright light for an extended period of time. As I say, those experiments had, I think it was 5,000 lux for 6 hours. And indeed, all the experiments that have been done on human regulation by light have long duration, 6.5 hours. Now, you can get an effect with, let's say, 200 or so lux, but it has to be at durations of 6 or 7 hours. And so that's the key thing. We are, of course, sensitive to light. That's what regulates our clock, but we need bright light of a long duration to have a big effect. And so that's why I think it's not the light before we go to bed from devices, it's the alerting effect they have on the brain. That, and of course, a smartphone is going to be much more activating than Kindle. A Kindle is, if you happen to be reading your favorite Jane Austen, your relaxing novel, then it's probably going to be good for you. If you're using a smartphone where you're looking at your emails, you're looking at, all of various Facebooks and various other things, that's going to be much more alerting. And particularly, and we've all experienced this, if we look at an email, which is particularly irritating before we go to sleep, it delays sleep. Worst experience I had of that was I just got a BlackBerry and I went and I spent wonderful time at University of Western Australia in Perth. And so, I'd have my BlackBerry, and I don't know if you remember, they had this wonderful little red light when new information had popped in. So during the day, I did my Australian emails, and then the European ones would come in, and then the North American ones would come in, and it was
annoying.
Yeah, and of course you've got jet lag, so you're not, you're still recovering, adjusting. So first of all, I started with the phone by my bed, and then put it in the next room. And I was so weak, I then just left it in the lab because I was, and it's really tricky. And I think we can get hooked with these things, and so it requires discipline.